That's interesting you'd ask that because that's sort of something that I feel like working with Felicity and Jana helped me sort of refine. And that came really early on in the process that they were listening to me talk and they were like, "Oh, it sounds like you write because of this." And I was like, "No one's ever put it exactly that way before." Um, yeah, I sort of uh, have a long career in the corporate world and uh, did the thing you're supposed to do and got a steady job and all of that, and have just got an MFA over the pandemic, and kind of have been working ever since then. Kind of came out of my MFA program with a pilot that I was working on and some mentors that were working on it with me. Um, and so this is sort of the next step after that. And that kind of is the same. I feel like that's the same. It's a similar track to like all the characters that I write. That I'm writing a lot of people who sort of wake up one day and find themselves in a structure that doesn't work for them anymore, and the story is about how they create their own structure around that. It's been really cool to kind of refine how I talk about that with Felicity and Jana during Fast Track. My mother has a degree in theatrical costume design, and my father has the kind of degree in classical guitar that lets you become a truck driver. So that's who I was raised by, and so yeah, a lot of storytelling, yeah, growing up, and that kind of continued. The easiest way for me to kind of keep that alive as I became an adult was to do graphic design, and so I've been doing that in the corporate level for a long time. And so that's sort of what kept all that alive. And then, after 10 or 15 years sitting in meetings, there was a real moment of like, I have to do something that's more varied, that's more meaningful. That's not just the outcome of which is not like already decided at the beginning. A lot of people that found out that I was like going back to school and like shifting everything were very much like, oh, that makes sense. Um, it felt like the next logical thing. It felt like I'd taken things as far as I could go in one direction. It was time to do the next thing. I mean, I'd been writing fairly seriously for a few years before getting an MFA, and I sort of I reached a point where I was like, I need to figure out what I don't know. Um, I need to like kind of uh, I need to grasp the science of this on a sort of a logical level before I can move forward. Like, so I have a good foundation. So that's what that was about, and it's been really kind of amazing being out of an MFA program for a year and a half, 2 years now, uh, to kind of come into something like the fast track and realize that I have a lot of the things that I need. Um, and then also realize so many new things that uh, I I kind of need a second MFA. You know what I mean? There's like a whole list of things that it's like, oh, I should have. I wish I'd learned that before. So it's been both. It's been both. But the ISA has been a really great environment I feel like Felicity and Shayna did, and everyone else did an incredible job of sort of uh, taking the time to figure out the level that I was coming in at and figuring out how they could best help me. Um, it didn't at all feel like I was sort of shoved into a program that was one size fits all. It really felt like uh, everyone was interested in the projects that they were bringing on board, um, and how they could help. A lot of it has to do with pitching. I mean, I think that's a huge thing just for the fast track because that's such a big focus. Um, how to balance talking about yourself more than you're used to, right? Uh, as well as keeping the focus entirely on the characters that you're talking about. Um, and it's sort of this high wire act that I uh, really enjoyed, once I felt like I got a little bit of practice, but I was coming in not knowing, not having pitched anything in such a like sort of formalized pitch setting. So uh, it was a lot of the mechanics of that. Um, it's a lot of the mechanics of I'm pitching TV, so we need to know 100% of this side of the story. This part of the story, we need to know where you're going, but don't waste our time taking about like it's a lot of those sort of mechanical things um, going on behind the scenes. Yeah, and then I think just overall, all of that, each of those pieces of pitching, I feel like feed back into the act of writing and how you're thinking about characters and how you're constructing a narrative based on this is what I need to know. This is what needs to be absolutely solid before we move forward. And this part is going to be the fun discovery along the way. And I feel like so many of those things are the complete inverse of what you'd expect in prose fiction or uh, even certainly poetry, but even playwriting as well. I'm a playwright fellow with Lambda, and it's really interesting to just compare the things you can. The place you start from, I think, is totally different. Uh, a play starts with a lot of questions and ends with even more questions, I feel like. Um, and pitching film and TV is a lot more like, here's the one question, and here's how we're going to attempt to solve it. And then we might not solve it. And then we're going to try to solve it again. And then we're going to try and solve it again. And we might not get to an answer, but this is the thing that we're working on. It's been really fun to sort of I feel like develop a rubric for sorting those things out. I mean, it's day one, right? Um, I feel like there's a lot of discourse in the MFA community, but just among writers in general about is if you start a project thinking about the pitch, if you start a project thinking about how you're going to sell it, um, or even just more broadly, if you start a project thinking about the audience and how this is going to sort of fit in the current landscape. Is that the tail wagging the dog? Is that like is it more artistically viable to follow the muse wherever that takes you, and is that something you can even worry about? And I think that's a super valid discussion. I think that's at the end of the day, it has to be just different for everybody. It honestly just has to be different for everybody, which is part of why writing is so fun because we all sort of self-select and sort into the like area that fits our brain patterns the best. But for me, knowing uh knowing the way that I would pitch something is really just another way of saying I know what this story is and I'm confident that this is an actually solid foundation. It's the same way that like you hear a lot of directors talk about before they sit down to start a project, they talk about it a lot. I feel like a lot of directors have a very like uh, uh, in-person process. Um, and it's because when you start to talk about something, there's a moment you can feel when you've gotten it. Um, and for me, I think pitching helped illuminate a lot of that. I think my process is going to keep changing, but being able to say, this is the thing, this is the story. Um, and maybe over the course of writing this, that's going to change. And we might uncover something else and realize that the whole thing needs to shift. But to know that you have that North Star means you're not spending a lot of time looking for it. Um, and I feel like even if it ends up changing, it's going to change in a better way by driving in one direction rather than driving in five directions at once. Um, yeah, so that's been incredibly helpful. A friend of a friend, uh, and there's a chapter here. I'm in Portland, Oregon. There's a chapter here, and I actually just had coffee with two of the leaders of the chapter here, and they're just like the nicest, most generous people. I feel like I've made friends, honestly, there. I think if I hadn't had that personal experience with the local chapter, the ISA wouldn't have been as high on my list. The biggest thing that stood out to me about the fellowship and the fast track is that it was more than just you have um, you have won this thing, and now you have a uh, a a state fair ribbon to hang in your wall. Do you know what I mean? Um, as helpful as that is, and like part of the process is just collecting those things and collecting uh, the experiences of having other people look at your work and appreciate your work. So as helpful as that is, the ISA fast track felt like this is going to be an experience where people kind of come alongside the project and really kind of invest in the project in a way that would let me know if I'm missing anything. I feel like one thing that that's one thing that I'm always thinking about, and I think a lot of us are thinking about in the back of our minds when we have a project that it seems like is not getting any traction, or uh, even worse, everyone kind of likes it and it doesn't go anywhere. The thing that I'm always thinking in the back of my mind is like, is there something about this that I'm missing? Like, if I turned this one piece 90 degrees, would it click with other people? And sometimes, especially as like an emerging writer who doesn't have a team around them yet, the it's a little bit nerve-wracking to be putting your work out there, not having had uh, it fully vetted yet. Like sometimes we should all like have a writing community around us and people that read our work, of course, but uh, sometimes it feels like the act of submitting and trying to get your work out there for an emerging writer is the vetting process that would actually go on kind of behind the scenes, if you had more of a team around you. So the ISA felt like these are people that are going to come around the project and help me steer it the last 100 yards. Uh, yeah, and I think that's really what I'm looking for in something like this. That's definitely something that's going to push uh, that pushed ISA up to the top of the list. I feel like I pay attention to it the same way an actor says that they don't watch themselves, which is that I absolutely pay attention to it. But I try not to put a lot of stock in that. Um, I feel like when something's advanced another round, that is that's just the momentum to take the other thing that you have in the back of the drawer and get it out to somebody else. Um, or at least it should be. In an ideal world, that's what it is. Sometimes it's also just an excuse to order donuts that day. That's really fun. It sounds like I'm making this up, but I was on which is kind of unusual for me in my day job. I was on a work trip that was intense, 8 hour long series of meetings in a windowless conference room. Um, and we were on like day 3 of this. Uh, Wonderful team. I like the people I work with, but 3 days, sun up to sundown in a conference room, is not good for the soul. And the end of day 3 is when we sort of emerged from that cave, and I got the email that I'd been accepted. So the juxtaposition of the two was really fun. Um, it was definitely a moment of like, yes, this is what I would rather be doing. I was definitely nervous going into it, just from lack of experience, and I think honestly the biggest thing that I'm taking away from this is just one more level of the process being demystified, you know, um, and so much of that is due to Felicity and Shayna, right? And so I came in very nervous and just really not wanting to waste the time at all. and not wanting to make a silly mistake here or there. I think there's a lot of advice for emerging writers that is so prescriptive that it sort of forgets that we are all people talking about imaginary stories. And uh, so you can kind of get into this headspace as an emerging writer that, like, if I make this one silly mistake, that's it. I have tanked my career, um, which of course is not true. And that is sort of the energy that Felicity and Jana came in with. That we were just chatting, and we spent a long time just chatting about the project, chatting about me, why I write, um, and like I said, they sort of helped refine that just by sort of uh, mirroring back to me what they were hearing me say, and with their experience pitching and saying, like, here's everything you just said. It sounds like you mean this 3-word sentence. And that was even right there was a shot of confidence, right? That something I'm saying does make sense if I can learn how to say it the right way. It's interesting. I think the meetings that most stand out to me are the ones where I didn't get all of my questions answered, and we didn't actually get to uh, maybe even the bulk of what I wanted to talk about, because we were just having so much fun chatting. And that's such a huge thing to realize, again, that these are just people and we all like talking about stories. Yeah, I feel like I had a couple of meetings where uh, I got off the call and I was like, oh, I would just like to be friends with you. This was great. Which is down to so much of that is down to the people that I say selects, to be mentors. That these are people that are coming in with sort of a generosity of spirit and uh, a willingness to teach. I think because as much as I know ISA is selecting people that are coming in with a project that is ready, um, to a large extent, uh, and this is a real pitch. This is a real meeting. There's also a real sense that I got from the mentors that they knew they were coming in with an extra 10% of generosity to teach and to like to I felt like not just ISA but the mentors that they brought on board were going to help me um, in the right way for the project. A couple of people who asked to see more materials. One producer asked to see a series outline, which was amazing, and definitely a reminder to double check the series outline, make sure it's exactly where it needs to be. Um, yeah, and one mentor, it turns out, also lives in Portland, Oregon. And so we've been trying to schedule coffee. Fever is a 30-minute TV series that's sort of in the comedy dramedy space. And it's set in 1970s in New York, and it sort of follows the straightest gay boy in New York uh, who wants to open a club uh, that's sort of to rival Studio 54, and the gayest straight boy in New York who's a go-go dancer. And the two of them have to team up, um, and they sort of discover that they need to form this misfit team to uh, the only way they can create this world that they're dreaming of is to work together and to do it in a sort of scrappy, low rent way in Bushwick instead of the glitzy Studio 54. And along the way, we get to explore a lot of sort of the nuances of sexuality and presentation, and that's a lot of what's in it sort of for me. I am I had this idea when a dear friend of mine mentioned very early on when I was just getting to know him that he was a go-go dancer in New York, and he's a uh, lovely, wonderful straight man, and it was not something that I could picture at all. And the more he talked about it, the more he kept talking about how um, it had really shaped his understanding of his own gender and the way he presents his gender, and the way it had kind of really opened up an understanding that queerness was uh, and sort of a space of family for him in an amazing way. And so I couldn't stop thinking about it, and so set it back in the 1970s and created this whole world around that. But so that's where a lot of this is coming from, is that exploration of um, queerness often doesn't look exactly like we think it does, and it's sort of two halves of the same coin, right? I think everyone is more queer than they think they are, and I think uh, uh, a lot of us queer people are more straight than we think we are. Do you know what I mean? And trying to celebrate that, and what better world to celebrate that in than this amazing time period where disco happened, just sort of out of the blue, post Stonewall, and right before the AIDS crisis hit. There was this tiny, tiny window in which disco happened, and disco, of course, is queer music that suddenly went mainstream in that tiny window. And if we don't have that tiny window, then disco remains queer music and nearly dies out in the 80s. And we don't have Madonna. We don't have, all of these people that have like are shaping culture today. So put it in there, right? And we suddenly get this sort of explosive celebration of like queerness as family. I think it's just quantity of research, honestly, which is not an answer that I would like to hear. Um, I, I wish it weren't. But there are a lot of great documentaries, and I think it's starting there. Um, I think it was important to stay away a little bit from some of the fictionalizations of that world, because I'm touching on a world that we've fictionalized before, um, and so it was kind of important to stay away from some of those fictionalized versions and to kind of stick with a lot of the facts. And the more I got into it, I started to understand why everyone who does a lot of research-based projects says that they love the research, because so many things uh, you sort of start to find the research circling uh, areas of the story that you didn't know were important, and you're like, oh my god! But if we drove in that direction, we could embrace this part of the real history that happened. Um, so I started to really really enjoy it after that. But yeah, I think it is just quantity of research, and luckily almost everything is at your fingertips now. I have a saved photo of one of the invitations that Studio 54 sent out on New Year's Eve, and of course they were open for right around a year, really, door to door, which is wild. I didn't. It looms so large, right, in our like cultural consciousness. Um, they were open for a very very short amount of time, and you can find a photo of that New Year's Eve invitation. Uh, and once you start doing that, then the world becomes a lot more real. All the times that I've been to New York before that definitely informed um, a lot of what I'm thinking about here as I'm writing it. And then, yeah, the last time I went was after I'd already started, and it was really cool um, to, I think you sort of go from a place of uh, trying to make this imaginary world fit with the real world that exists, to sort of walking down a street in Bushwick and kind of understanding where your characters live and where they would be in this scene over here. Yeah, that was really fun. I'm an extreme introvert. Again, I think we sort of self-select to be writers. Uh, the realization, I think, like I said before, the realization that, oh, this is just people having a conversation was actually very calming for me because I'm an extreme introvert, but I uh I do like some people. Um and so I think that's one thing that I would say is that even though yes, this is intimidating and it is going to require some of that on your feet ability, um it is just people having a conversation. And so many of these people are coming in with that generosity of spirit. So I think that's one part of it. The other part of it is I absolutely wasn't alone in any of it. Felicity and Shayna, that's one of the things that I appreciated is that I could definitely tell that they were trying to help me in the ways that I needed. Um, and that they had a whole toolbox of ways to help people in different ways to sort of work with everybody's strengths. So for me, Felicity and Shayna were helping me refine the actual pitch and helping remind me to not talk so fast and to have a list of questions so that you have stuff in your back pocket. All of those little reminders were really, really, really helpful. Uh, and then I think there are you could kind of tell that they had so many other ways to help a lot of other people who might struggle in a different area um, than I did. Uh, but yeah, I was not alone in any part of it, and even just literally on the Zoom calls, Felicity and or Shayna are there for half of it, and uh, but definitely you're supported all the way through. Well, like I said, I had a producer ask for a series outline, which is kind of a big next step. And uh, even that, just double checking before I send this off, double check that that is in a good place was a really cool moment to remind myself to get out of the world of the pilot, right? And uh, out of the world of just pitching this pilot and to say, what could happen in the rest of the series, right? So that's what I'm going into the new year with. Uh, really trying to get that series outline out there. Um, trying to follow up with a lot of people that I already met during the fast track week, uh, and then also really making sure, and I'm doing this over the holiday, that I have other projects that I'm working on too. Right? You can pour too much into one thing, and trying to make sure I have uh, a well-rounded set of stuff that I believe in strongly and that feels like me. And that goes back to honestly starting from the pitch, and it goes back to the ways that Felicity and Shayna uh, sort of helped me distill a lot of things about how I write and why I write and the things I write. And even now, diving back into some other projects, uh, all of those things have had a huge effect to like help me winnow down what I'm going to work on and the direction that I want to steer it, so that so that we're telling the same story, right? Because this is uh, uh, there's the story that you're writing, and then there's the story that you're telling about the story that you're writing, and then there's the story that other people have uh, in their mind about why you wrote what you wrote. Um, and so I think a big thing that I'm going into next year with is the like a little bit more of an ability to see all three of those story levels at once. Um, and as it's been a huge part of helping me zoom out and like helping me find my own language for those things.